Okay, so this is the beginning of the free will part. Um, I have very detailed notes on this, but they are also very involved and complex, and they would not read well if I were to just ramble them off, right? You almost need to see them in like diagrams and Excel spreadsheets. So I will try to convey the essence of what I'm talking about as coherently as possible. So just to recap real quickly, we talk about balance, which is a three-dimensional ledger, but we know that it's not just a surface video of the universe that we can stop and look at the frames. It's an in-depth, far-reaching mosaic of 4D, four-dimensional cycles, clocks, processes, in my opinion, fourth-dimensional volumes. You know, we talked about the ball bearing and moving through space-time. And then we have the windows of perception, which is a tool that we can use to consciously examine and determine how much of what we do is under our control, which I'll explain, and also to hyper-focus on and enrich experiences so that we can then in turn, with discipline, have more ownership of our actions and our what we are calling free will. And then I talked about native states, which are limitations, caps on how much of our desires and free will we can execute. So my working definition of free will right now is the way to start it is this, okay? You have the subconscious, which is a huge volume of memories. All the experiences you've had your whole life, all the stuff from your childhood that may or may not have messed you up. Desires, longings, like I said before, fetishes, prejudices, all the stuff that a lot of people, that just don't want to look at, and good stuff, but it's all, some of it is very abstract and, so we have that volume of information, data in our brain, okay? And then we have the ego, which is the interpreter of that data and then hands it off to the conscious mind, what we would consider our self, okay? And I think that I'm saying the ego is the interpreter because if you ask a question or you're having a conversation and you're reaching into your subconscious for words and memories that you're not really accessing, they're just coming to you, you may have multiple sources that are coming up through your subconscious. And your ego decides what gets through the gate, like a funnel, and then gets delivered. Okay, so sometimes we don't know what we think or what we feel. Someone says, "What do you think of this?" And we're like, "Oh, I don't really know," but there's a feeling. There's like a, an imprint or a vague idea, and I think that's because more than one, concept was trying to make its way through. If it was a decisive one-word answer or one concept answer, then it would be more succinct, right? And we've all had moments where we are more succinct, but there are moments, a lot of moments, where the subconscious is helping us work through stuff, and the ego has its own issues, and it's trying to process that data and send it up to the quote-unquote conscious mind, right? And I'm separating the conscious mind and the ego because people talk about ego dissolution under the influence of, psychedelics, or if you go on a fast for a long time, or if you go into a flotation tank, you can still perceive on a conscious level things happening to you, but your ego, the parts of you that you think are you, start breaking off, and like in the book I talk about them calving off and floating away. So looking at that picture of a cognitive system, my theory is that the first thought you have about anything is not involved, it's not under the purview of free will. By that I mean that we have as many thoughts as, blinks and breaths, and we're having a lot of thoughts, right? Well, you're not consciously saying, I think I'll think about XYZ, okay? These things are arising up from the depths of your subconscious. And I just thought of this, I'm just throwing this in. Think of ego as a well of consideration, almost like a committee or just like a holding area for contemplation and consideration. They're also being instigated or prodded or generated, or however you want to say it, from environmental cues. So you have all the data in your subconscious that's already there, and then you have cues in your environment. Let's say you are walking through your house and you are not conscious of being hungry, okay? But then your stomach, sends out some neurochemicals, and your other bodily systems, your blood sugar's low. You get the idea of, I think I'll have like a sandwich, right? That first thought, that kernel thought, is not something you generated. It's something that came up through the subconscious, got sorted by the ego, and then popped into the conscious mind. So that is like a write-off, okay? We have them all the time, all day long, I think I'll eat something. Look at that bird. Oh, look at that, attractive person. And an example of this would be attraction. Okay, they say and I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but they say we evaluate a partner in like less than a second or something, right? We're not consciously going through this checklist. Our mind is taking a snapshot of what we're seeing visually, feeding it into the subconscious, which now it's a memory and data. It's coming back up through the ego and gets delivered as a thought, like wow, or ooh, damn, or whatever, or a feeling, a sensation of attraction, like maybe it also releases hormonal, changes, or whatever it does chemically in the body, right? And then we get the result, which we think we thought of, but it is actually a reaction. It's reactionary. Okay? If this were true, and the random thoughts are not things that we are generating willingly, or you could also look at to tangent real quickly, negative thoughts, okay? No one wants to have negative thoughts all day. But there's a lot of people, myself included, that have a lot of negative thoughts. The shit just pops up from our past, our present, about the future. We wouldn't want to think these things. There's no reason for us to desire to think these things, right? Sometimes, I have OCD, so sometimes some OCD thoughts pop into my head. Sometimes just negativity. Sometimes I'll get sad for no reason. There's no environmental reason. There's no stimuli reason for me to be sad. So that's got to be internally generated, right? So if you're willing to accept the premise that first thought is not part of free will, then we can start talking about what is free will. And what I would say is that free will is every thought about that initial thought that has to do, it can just be one more thought, okay? And you're thinking that thought actively, your consciousness, okay? But if there is a chain of thoughts that's stretched to a conclusion, then you have a temporal chain or link, right, of events that will happen if you would get to the end of whatever that desired result is. So let's say randomly, your body tells you that you're hungry. Your subconscious knows you love sandwiches, right? Feeds the information up. You know you have the ingredients for a sandwich. And sometimes we don't. We're like, I want a sandwich. And we don't remember we don't have everything for a sandwich. So that's not very conscious. But anyways, so the thought arises, sandwich, right? Then whatever builds on that thought, like, what kind of sandwich? What kind of bread do I have? Now you are linking other thoughts to that first involuntary thought kernel. And I would say that all of those concurrent thoughts are active free will. This would also extend to actions. So you could just lay in bed and have a thought, like, what am I going to do today? Spontaneously arises because you're bored or something. If you say, well, maybe I'll do yard work, and then you say, then I'm going to have to get the tools out, you start putting out these thoughts, and that is free will, the ability to exercise conscious selection of thoughts or actions. Okay, if you're willing to accept that premise, then we can say you go to get the bread, okay? Getting the bread is one node of that chain, one link in that chain. But you're not actively saying, hand, move, feet. All that stuff is subconscious management of your systems to get to the bread. But the bread part is the conscious endpoint for the bread thought, or the bread free will goal, if you will. So you don't got to think about all the movements to get to the bread unless you're physically impaired in some way and it's difficult, and you're like, okay, I got to, raise my wounded hand, or, my janky shoulder is going to pop, so I got to move this way. It's usually just automatic, okay? So if you look at something like, let's say someone wants to run a marathon, but there had to be the initial kernel of that thought. So maybe they watched a video, and the stimuli from the video sent up through their subconscious the desire to think, maybe I want to run a marathon. So that pops up. That's involuntary. It's not free will. Maybe I want to run a marathon. Every decision that you make that is dedicated to that initial, or the end goal, because if you run the marathon, you got to finish the marathon, if that is to happen in linear time, right? The mileposts, if you will, along the way of finishing the marathon, you got to buy the shoes. You got to start training. Every thought and action that is linked directly to the end point of the goal, if you reach it. I mean, even if you don't, if you hurt your foot and you couldn't run the marathon, everything up to the point that you could not run the marathon is still all free will in a related chain to that initial non-free will kernel thought. Okay. So in the book, I talk about free will power. Okay, so you have free will, and then you have the concept of willpower. Now, people use this term to mean, I'm not going to do something. I'm not going to eat the sandwich or cookie. I'm going to use willpower. Okay, just not do the thing. You also have to use willpower to do the thing, like run the marathon. However, what I'm saying is that the willpower is simply the energy used to execute the desire or the chain of free will events. So it's the physical exertion, it is the amount of denial of the things that you don't want to do, it is the strength, the discipline of the actions. Okay. It's easy to say that I have free will and anything I do is under my control, and then someone says, well, jump on one foot, and the guy's like, oh, I don't want to, and that's my free will. And then he's using his willpower in that instance to execute his free will by not doing the thing. Okay. But for me, willpower is about the intensity or the quantity of action put out or required for you to do the thing. So someone that is an ultra marathoner is not going to quit before someone like me would quit. I would run, let's say I could physically run without dying 100 miles, okay? I'm going to quit before 100 miles is up if I'm not trained, even if I could do it. This is the principle that the Marines talk about, the hidden 40% or whatever it is, 30%. Basically what they're saying is there is a percentage of your biology and psychology that is untapped even when you think you're at your absolute limit. Okay, so now we're talking about native states. So what I'm saying is that without knowing what your absolute limit, native state limits are, there is that hidden percentage of which you could use to complete whatever your goal is, but you're going to quit before that if you aren't disciplined and, trained and stuff like that.